What if our very survival depended on our trusting in God's abundance? It's a curious question, right? If you're like me, your first reaction was, well, yeah, of course I'm trusting in God's abundance. And, I work in the church. I'm thinking about church stuff, getting ready for worship, all this. And then the second part of you kind of jumps in, like, but do I? You start thinking about all the corners that you sort of cut faith-wise. And if you're like me, that's the journey that gets taken there. But it's the core. That question is the core of our scripture today. Many of you know the story of the widow's mite, right? M-I-T-E, not M-I-G-H-T. The widow's mite. As it plays out, Jesus, he's at first kind of chastising the Pharisees, the scribes, the people who are running the church. He's talking about how they would often get lost in their own power. They would forget the humanity of the people that they are supposed to be leading. You can hear them saying things like, well, it's all for the good of the church. It's all to make the church healthier. That's good, right? He goes after these scribes even more, and he says, for the sake of appearances, they would say long prayers. I'm trusting he's not talking to anyone here. But he might be. He might be talking to me. But then after that, he goes at the wealthy with that same kind of caution, that same kind of concern. He says, despite their large giving, they aren't really committed in the way God is hoping that we are committed. He compares these wealthy people to the poor widow who gives all that she has. They give from their abundance, what they can easily offer to the church and to God, while she gives of, or maybe even despite of, her scarcity, her poverty. It's an interesting thing, this kind of faith, the faith of this widow. What if our very survival depended on our trusting in God's abundance? It's a curious question, because it can be challenging to trust like that. We don't often focus on our abundance. We don't focus on what we should be grateful for. We get more concerned about our scarcity. We get concerned about what we don't have or what we're going to need later that we don't currently have. We're making all our decisions about giving, all our decisions even about life in general. It's difficult to assume that God is going to have everything covered. We've got bills to pay. We've got people to take care of. And who knows where I'm going to be health-wise. I could get injured. I could get sick. There are no guarantees. Finding our way to that place of abundance and gratitude for abundance, it is a fraught journey. Society itself can make it tough to trust in abundance. We live in kind of a market system, right? Where part of living in our society is you develop a service that you can offer, or a product that you can offer, a skill you can offer, and then somebody else pays you for that skill or that thing, that product that you offer. But usually what that means is, because we're all depending on that to a certain extent, is we're being reminded of that skill or that service or that thing that we don't quite have, because those folks are trying to get that in front of you. They're trying to help you understand your need for something. We need stuff, everyone. We need this stuff I'm offering for you. You know why you need it? Because you don't have it. That's why you need it. Right? And nobody in our society today is really making any commercials that say things like, "You're fine. Take it easy. We'll be here for you when you're ready." We don't hear that commercial, right? Abundance national health care. Don't worry about paying us a thing. Just wait till you're sick and then we'll talk about it, right? You don't see that commercial going on anymore or ever, right? Because we're in this sort of cycle of being reminded of what we don't quite have. And that's a lot to take on, to always be reminded of the things we don't have and potentially need. I think of what that technology has done to our children, because it's kind of the same thing, but just in a little bit different package, right? TikTok, Instagram, some other social media I don't know about because I'm too old. They're all out there, and there's definitely a lot of advertising in those streamers as well. But what's even more prevalent are the videos that are playing on those streamers. These are often very highly staged, spontaneous moments caught on video. Right? And you start scrolling through these things, these spontaneous things that happen perfectly, whether it's because they're funny or everybody lands in the right spot or whatever. But it's this idyllic thing that happens, and you're seeing one after the other. And after a while, you start thinking, well, my life's not quite this perfect. It's not quite this ideal. It's not quite this funny or this smart. And those people, what have they mastered that I haven't mastered? What am I lacking? Why am I lacking? It's the same kind of thing, I think, that we're doing to our young people as well, where we're reminding them in just the way society runs about what they lack. Yeah, trusting in abundance, it can be tough. Especially when scarcity is so easily and frequently put in front of us. What if our very survival depended on our trusting in God's abundance? It's a curious question. Many of us voted this week. Our hope is that we have done all of our work, right? We've come up with the most logical, the most pragmatic, the most empathetic solutions and decisions that we can come up with? Or are you more concerned, lacking the confidence that you were able to do that? That voting booth, it's a place of scarcity, is it not? We walk in with these ideas and remembrances of political processes that have reminded us of how important everything is, all of the existential issues that we are wrestling with. It's hard to not go into that voting booth with those issues pulling at our sleeves. This is not just about a societal problem. It's about the very core of democracy. The survival of the nation, pulling at our sleeve. And we're Christians. We're the ones who are supposed to be grounded in our faith in God and God's presence and God's power. We're supposed to be sitting in that space, very confident of God and what God can do. But it's difficult to maintain that faith and that trust in God when the scarcity is so prevalent in front of us, so frequently in front of us. Often we don't feel God's presence. We don't feel God's abundance. We feel scarcity. And we vote often from scarcity. Father Richard Rohr is someone I hold dearly, and Callie's as a quote for me. I appreciate her putting up. He's someone I appreciate dearly and follow as to try to understand better how we might live into God's abundance. For him, much of the challenge in life is being able to live a life committed to God's love and committed to God's justice while dealing with the realities of our imperfect world. Being godly despite what can happen around us. He writes, the theological virtue of hope is the patient and trustful willingness to live without closure, without resolution, and still be content and even happy, because our satisfaction, capital S, a divine satisfaction, is now at another level. And our source, again, capital S, is beyond ourselves. Richard Rohr talks about a maturing faith, a faith that allows us to live in a more confident place of ourselves and what we're able to manage, a more confident place about how the world is moving. And so he's trying to tell us, if we want to know God's presence, despite our world's imperfections, we need to trust in God's abundance. We need to trust in God's abundance despite what always feels like scarcity. What if our very survival depended on our trusting in God's abundance? It's a curious question. This obviously poor woman comes into a temple. Amidst all the crowds who've gathered, they're there to live out their regular church experience. And there are people who are of great wealth. There is also Jesus and his disciples present. This widow, this woman, her faith experience is different than our normal sitting together, prayers, songs, sermon. Their faith experience was more about these stations they would move to, stations of prayer, stations of sacrifice, stations of offering. And you would move through each of these stations. And this woman gets to this station for her giving, for her tithing. At that station is a box. And coming out of that box is like a horn, like a trumpet horn with a bell on the top. Right? And what you would do, it's a device designed to collect your offerings. But you can tell a metal funnel that leads into a wood box, well, that's going to be a little noisy as you drop in your coins. It becomes a little bit of theater, a little bit of a stage performance as somebody comes in and drops in their offering. Because those big old coins that are worth more make a big old noise. And maybe that person feels like they can walk a little taller. The little coins, the ones that aren't worth as much, well, they don't make as much noise as they roll through that metal trumpet into that wooden box. It's safe to say her small gift would not have made that big of an impression. It might not even make a sound at all. They call that coin a lepta. That's what they would call those. In the King James Version of our Bible, they use the word mite. You know what a mite is? That little teeny bug. Can there be anything smaller than this coin? These coins that this widow offers. They often use widows in these stories. Jesus would use widows in these stories because it was a male-dominated hierarchical situation. Widows were understood as even in worse positions because it was understood that the husband took care of the wife. And a widow, not having that husband, well, there wasn't something governmental that was helping those people get taken care of. There wasn't a marriage contract that helped a widow. And so they were looked to be even more disadvantaged. It was safe to assume this was all or most of what this widow had. It was also safe to assume that she probably needed it. And yet, she dropped her comparatively small offering on this stage, in this performance. She did it because it's good to share your blessings. She did it because it's good to help a community to care for itself. But she also did it because she trusted in God's presence with her. She did it because she has faith in God's abundance, and despite her own experience of scarcity and poverty. What if our very survival depended on our trusting in God's abundance? It's a curious question. A curious question indeed. Amen.